the way we actually came up with it, you'll notice here is a little chart of Dramatica. Move it a little closer here. There's 4 major areas: universe, physics, mind, and psychology. These 4 areas represent the 4 different classes of problems that we might have in stories. Think about it for a moment. In an actual real-life situation, if you have a problem, it's going to fall into one of these categories. Why? Well, here's how we started again. We started with universe and mind. We said, oh, it's man against the environment, basically. Here's the situation, man against the environment. And the environment has certain considerations, and the mind has certain considerations. We have certain attitudes and feelings, and when they're not in line, out of phase with our environment, that's when we have a problem. And it doesn't matter if we change our feelings or if we change the way things are to get in touch with our feelings, in line with our feelings. Either way, it resolves the problem. But as long as there's a differential between what we want and the way things are, we've got a problem. Later on, we realized the universe really was just a fixed situation. But you needed to separate out the activities, physics, the activities, the endeavors that go on in life, because some things are situations that are just bad situations, and other things are activities that are going awry. Similarly, in our own minds, we have fixed attitudes, prejudices, or fixations on someone. And those can cause problems, or problems can be caused by the manner in which we think, the way we try to resolve issues, the way we start from a perfectly good premise and argue it into something ridiculous, something counterproductive. So there's an external and internal state and process. 4 different areas. And you think about it, forgetting about the names, universe, physics, mind, psychology, we chose those because they were accurate, not because they were easy to understand. And you'll find in Dramatica theory that's often the case. Words were chosen to be most accurate, not to be easiest to grasp, because we were going for accuracy in story structure. And we felt it was better somebody put in a little extra work to understand things accurately than that we give them something that wasn't as accurate that they could get right away. In the long run, it will serve you better. But look at those 4 areas: internal and external state or process. Any problem you can come across in real life is going to be described best as an internal or external state or process. Now, that being the case, the rest of the Dramatica chart is basically going down deeper and deeper into subdividing those internal and external states and process. You can see that subdivision here a little bit better. Here, hold it right up to the camera, you can see that it's the same chart as the other side, only now it's 3-dimensional. Now this particular chart, and even closer, has 4 levels, and each level subdivides the previous level into 4 parts, smaller and smaller, until we get down to the smallest details. The top level most affects genre, because it's the broad stroke level, the most broad stroke. The level underneath it, let me get one of these really close to you here so you can see what I'm really talking about. Okay? The second level down is where plot is most affected. 3rd level down there are the variations. That's where theme, variations of a theme, is most controlled. And at the very bottom level of this one is the character elements. So you end up with sort of genre at the top, genre classes, plot types, thematic variations, and character elements. Each of these 4 towers represents those 4 areas, the internal or external state or process. And there's a reason that it carries it all the way down to 4 levels but no more, and also why there are 4 areas on the side. Externally, we can look at mass and energy, space and time. Internally, we can look at their equivalents: knowledge, energy, knowledge, thought, ability, and desire. Inside, knowledge is the mass of the mind. It's our knowledge base. Thought is the energy of the mind that interacts with knowledge the same way that energy interacts with mass. Thought and knowledge can either be applied to each other, just the way energy can be assigned to a billiard ball to make it move, or with enough thought you can create new knowledge, and with a little bit of knowledge you can generate an awful lot of thought, just like a little bit of mass can create a lot of energy in a nuclear explosion. As a matter of fact, the equation E equals mc squared works equally well for mental equations, and some of those relationships are applied in the story engine that you used in Dramatica. It's simple when you look at it as being the same as some of the work that Einstein did. It's complicated if you look at it on its own and say this is how it works. But when you look at those 4 dimensions outside and 4 inside, they're represented in the 4 different levels of the chart, and they're also represented in the 4 different towers. So you get 4 going 2 ways, laterally and down. One represents the mass, energy, space, and time. The other represents knowledge, thought, ability, and desire. And together that creates 8 different kinds of evaluation tools that we have. 8. It's a well-known psychological fact that short-term memory is 7 items plus or minus 2. Why 7? Because we're dealing with these 4 external and 4 internal dimensions at all times. We stand on one as our base from which to measure the others, and we have 7 other slots that we can put variables into. What does this have to do with story? Well, it means that stories can only be a certain size before they get to the point where if they were any larger, then an audience would not be able to grasp the largest concept at the same time they were grasping the smallest concept. They would have to shift the way they were looking at things and put things into long-term memory rather than getting a gestalt, a filled mind that covers every corner, no more than is necessary, no less, so that it is complete and completely filling. That's what a story needs to be a grand argument story, as we call it. Grand argument story because it argues every single conceivable point out to the nth degree until you reach the point where, if you went another step, you wouldn't be able to keep track of the original concept and still look at the new concept you're bringing in. As it turns out, it's 4 by 4. Now, to give you an example of how this works in your own mind, why it's actually that way, let's do a little mind trick here, a little mind example. Picture, if you will, a single string twisted into a twine. Now, that's a 3-dimensional object that's twisted into a twine. And then you take that twine and you move it into a second position, you coil that twine. And now you move that into a third position where you take the twine that's coiled also and you coil the coil. Now imagine that. Twine, twine coiled, and twine coiled in a coil. You get that far. One more step, coil it again. That's about as far as you can go. Because if you're trying to imagine in your mind the 3-dimensional object with it coiling, and then you're carrying it through 1 dimension, 2 dimensions, 3 dimensions, 4 dimensions, at that point you've filled up 7 different areas, and your own mind is where you're standing. It gives you nowhere else to go. You can't carry it to a 5th coil. Nobody can carry it to a 5th coil. That's why stories generally are about 2 hours in length in the movies and about 200 pages in a novel. You can put more than one story into a finished work, you can have subplots and lots of other things, but when you're dealing with them, you're going to lose track of the main story. There's nothing wrong with that. It just means that Dramatica wants to be complete for any story, whether it's a subplot story or a major story, and so it gives you one complete story as deep as you can go to cover all of those details through all of those dimensions before the audience would lose track of the initial concept to get into the next concept.